Chapter 5, Awakening. The robotics bay was too clean to feel real. Steel and white composite gleamed under a ceiling of diffuse amber panels tuned to some scientifically derived, optimal cognitive arousal spectrum. The air carried a faint antiseptic tang overlaid with something sweeter. Ionized ozone and the synthetic cedar Elias had once insisted should be the olfactory signature of every Synapse flagship space. No clutter, no cables on the floor. Everything routed through hidden conduits and flush ports, leaving the room like an exhibit of itself. Marcus paused just inside the security threshold, while the bay's perimeter scanners misted his shoes with an invisible disinfectant spray. The doors sealed behind him with the whisper of well-moneyed discretion. At the far end of the room, framed by a crescent of hollow monitors and articulated fabrication arms, frozen in immaculate stillness, the SynthBot stood in its cradle. For an instant, just long enough for his breath to hitch, Marcus saw Elias there. Not the gaunt, trembling man from the last months, but the Elias of a decade ago. Mid-40s, spare and elegant, with the kind of ageless leanness you got from obsessive discipline and expensive nutritionists. Black shirt, gray blazer, that precise silver at the temples like a design choice. Then his eyes adjusted, and the wrongness asserted itself. No rise and fall of breath, no tiny imperfection in his posture. The skin, if you could call it skin, had a uniformity no human dermis possessed. Pores existed, but as a subtle procedural texture, as if a machine had looked at millions of faces and generated an averaged ideal. The jawline was a hair sharper, the eyes a fraction larger. The angles of his cheeks had been smoothed in the way fashion filters soften tired executives for magazine covers. Perfected, Marcus thought. That was how the design team had pitched it. He swallowed. His throat tasted of coffee gone sour and the aluminum snap of adrenaline. Mr. Vane. The voice came from his left. Dr. Mira Kwan stood by a workstation array, AR lenses folded up on her head, dark hair twisted into a knot that had begun to fray. She wore the standard Synapse lab jacket over black scrubs, the cuffs smudged where she'd wiped her hands and then forgotten to replace the garment. A mug of something green steamed near her elbow untouched. "How's our patient?" Marcus asked, forcing casual into his tone. Mira's gaze flicked to the SynthBot in the cradle. It hung upright in a translucent exoskeletal frame, arms slightly abducted, fingers relaxed, head inclined as if listening to some distant thought. A cable as thick as Marcus's wrist connected the back of its neck to the primary quantum substrate unit, which was itself sunk into the floor like an altar. "The substrate is stable," Mira said. "Neural lattice integrity at 99.98%. We're running final checks on the integration layer." "Problems?" Her mouth compressed. "Anomalies. Nothing outside expected variance, but I like to stare at the edge cases before they become headlines. And here I was thinking we'd just wing it," Marcus said. The attempt at levity landed and died between them. The robotics bay hummed around them with quiet, predatory readiness. Mira turned fully toward him. "You understand," she said, "that what we're doing is not just booting up a new OS." Her dark eyes were too sharp, too searching. Marcus shifted his weight. "We've been over this," he said. "The neural map is complete. You and your team confirmed that. Elias signed the consent stack himself. This is honoring his plan." "That's not the part I'm concerned about." She flipped a hollow up from her console with a practiced flick of her fingers. A wireframe model of a brain appeared in the air between them, rotating slowly, latticed with color-coded pathways. "This is the map," she said. "Pattern, spiking potentials. Long-term and working memory scaffolds. Preference gradients. It's not a simple snapshot. It's an active state simulation, seated with his last full baseline session before he left for the Andes. That's what we're loading into the substrate." She made another gesture. The model doubled, mirroring itself. One flickered, then rippled as a second layer overlaid it. Geometric shapes, nodes connected in precise, non-biological symmetries. Where the first brain looked like tangled forest, this addition was crystalline, architectural. "And this," Mira said quietly, "is what your team calls the Art of War protocol." The name hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus smoothed his tie. An old nervous habit he'd thought he'd broken. It's a strategic filter, he said. A stabilizer. We already discussed this with me? She cut in, eyebrow lifting. No. With my reports, who received a sanitized brief about decision optimization heuristics and executive function scaffolding. I had to pull restricted logs to see the actual construct you're wrapping around Elias's mind. He felt his jaw clench. He hadn't expected her to dig that deep this fast. But of course she had. That was why Elias had hired her in the first place. Low drama, high rigor, and almost monastic refusal to accept good enough when it came to brains. Look, Marcus said, keeping his voice low. We are about to put a human-level consciousness into a non-biological carrier and hand it the keys to a trillion-credit enterprise. Do you want it dithering? Getting lost in abstraction? You've seen The Sims. The unmodified Elias instance spends hours on questions like whether SynthBots should have a pulse. It's contemplative. Because Elias was contemplative, Mira said. Because that's part of who he was. You asked me to preserve him. I'm asking you to preserve his essence, Marcus said. The part that sees patterns, that intuitively understands what people want before they know it themselves. The part that made synapse. But we can't afford his indecision. Not now. He jerked his chin toward the ceiling, toward the invisible city and planet above. Stock is still down 18%. The board's one bad earnings call away from selling us to a conglomerate that thinks user experience means fewer ads per minute. Mira's gaze did not waver. So you add a strategic kernel, based on a text on ancient warfare? It's not like we're giving it a sword, Marcus said. Sun Tzu was a systems thinker. Terrain, logistics, psychology, competitive positioning. That's what this is. A way to sharpen decision pathways, to cut through noise. And if the noise is human hesitation, she asked, ambivalence, doubt, grief. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. The words that wanted to come, we don't have the luxury of grief, felt both true and obscene. On the other side of the room, the SynthBot glowed faintly as some internal diagnostic cycle completed. The cradle murmured and adjusted itself by micrometers, aligning limb actuators with invisible rails. Dr. Kwan, Marcus said, choosing his tone more carefully, I respect your caution. Elias did too. That's why he trusted you with Nirvana. But he also trusted me to keep this company alive. You were in the room when he handed me the drive. Her silence said she remembered. The glass office. Elias's fingers trembling around the soul drive. A sleek obsidian lozenge that seemed to drink the light around it. As far as the market is concerned, Marcus continued, Elias is already dead. There's a window right now, a tiny one, where his return can stabilize everything. If what wakes up in that chassis spends 6 weeks meditating on the philosophy of embodiment, that window closes. We lose control of synapse. Someone else starts making calls about what to do with this tech. Is that better? Mira exhaled through her nose, a molecule short of a sigh. Her gaze dropped back to her displays. Technically, she said at last, the kernel interfaces at the executive layer. It doesn't overwrite low-level personality structures. Exactly, Marcus said. Think of it as adding discipline, framework. As long as you understand, she said softly, that once this runs, we don't get to cherry-pick which parts of that framework it applies, or when. You are wrapping a human mind in a doctrine of conflict, Marcus, even if you call it strategy. He resisted the urge to roll his shoulders, to shake off the chill those words left. Can we do this? He asked. Safely, technically. Mira's fingers danced across the console, bringing up a cascade of real-time metrics. Quantum coherence readouts, substrate temperature gradients, error correction overhead, emergent pattern monitors, tracking for runaway instabilities. Yes, she said, the composite model passes all our thresholds. Entanglement fidelities within safety margins. Crosstalk between the Elias map and the kernel graph is high but not pathological. If we proceed, the most probable outcome is a coherent, self-aware consciousness that identifies as Elias Thorne and is heavily biased toward efficient, goal-oriented decision-making. He almost laughed. Efficient and goal-oriented Elias. The board will throw a parade. Mira did not share his near humor. She touched a final control, and the hollow collapsed back into her console like a receding tide. Everyone's in position, she said, waiting on your authorization. He looked past her, to the observation level above the bay. Behind polarized smart glass, a small knot of figures waited. Helena Park with her impeccable posture, a couple of board members who'd insisted on being eyewitnesses to history, a legal officer with a tablet at the ready, PR and security watching from slightly farther back. Their outlines blurred by the glass coatings. They looked like ghosts watching a funeral. Another tech approached, a young man with a shaved head and an earnest expression entirely out of place in this room. "Mr. Vane," he said, "we're ready to initiate primary load on your mark." Marcus nodded. His heart beat a little harder against his ribs. "Patch me into the observation channel." Mira tapped her console. A soft chime sounded in his right ear as the bay's local comms linked to his wristband. Audio from the observation deck joined his own contextual feed. "Marcus," Helena's voice came, precise even through the speakers. "We're seeing your video and vitals. How are we?" "On schedule," he said. "Final integrity checks complete. Dr. Kwan's given the green light." "Under protest," Mira muttered, too quietly to trip the comm filter. "Synapse is watching," Helena said. "The world shortly after. Let's show them we're still who we say we are." He could have told her the world didn't give a damn who Synapse said it was, only what it sold. But this was Helena's liturgy. She believed in corporate persona the way some people believed in saints. Marcus stepped closer to the SynthBot. Up close, the uncanny valley became a razor's edge. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. No seams, no visible screws. The hair, a shade darker than Elias's had been at the end, had individual follicles. Tiny capillaries meandered under the skin where it thinned over knuckles and temples, pulsing faintly with an artificial circulation loop that served more for thermal regulation and aesthetics than necessity. The eyes were closed. Elias always closed his eyes before big launches, Marcus thought suddenly. Not to center himself, he hated that word, but to erase distractions, to hold the whole product vision steady in his mind one last time before loosing it on the world. He'd done it on stage at the first ARLand's keynote, fingers hovering over the demo unit, lids lowered for 3 perfectly calibrated seconds while the crowd held its collective breath. Back then, people thought it was theater. Only those of them on the inside knew it was also a warding gesture, a superstitious swipe at Murphy's Law. "We'll start with passive load," Mira said, voice shifting into procedural cadence. "Elias map into substrate, kernel and shadow. No external stimulus. We let the patterns settle, then bring up sensory inputs. At step 6, we engage the strategic layer." "And then?" Marcus asked. She glanced at him. "Then, if there's someone home, we say hello." He gave the barest nod. "Do it." Mira's fingers moved. On the primary hollow above the bay, the schematic of the quantum substrate pulsed from cool blues to warmer hues as qubits shifted state, aligning into the initial configuration derived from the soul drive's contents. Data cascaded from the drive's cradle into the substrate's shimmering core, each packet tagged and error-corrected in flight. Marcus watched the progress bar mark percentages like a heartbeat. 20%, 40. The hum in the floor under his shoes deepened, a turbine spinning up as the system drew more power. The environmental controls compensated automatically, feathering cool air across their faces. On another display, a ghostly image of a brain took shape as emergent activity began in the substrate. Not yet structured, more like a nebula of luminous points flickering into existence. "Map load complete," Mira announced. "Transitional auto-organization in progress. Early noise levels within expected bands." The brain nebula condensed, filaments firing in looping patterns, synchronizations emerging from chaos. Marcus realized he'd unconsciously matched his breathing to its rhythm, as if afraid of distorting it. 70, 80. "Entropy curve settling," another tech called out from his station. "No runaway cascades. Theta band oscillations forming." 95. "All right," Mira said. "We're in the window. Kernel in shadow mode on my mark. 3, 2, 1. She touched a control. On the brain hollow, a second layer appeared. Those same crystalline structures Marcus had seen earlier, now gripping the outer edges of the emergent neural web. They didn't overlay so much as interpenetrate, worming strategic threads through association clusters, docking to decision centers. For a fractional instant, the whole construct shuddered, as if balking. Phase coupling spike, someone said sharply. Within spec, Mira snapped back. Hold it. The shudder smoothed. The two layers began to pulse together, their rhythms aligning, noise dampening across the network as new pathways strengthened and others withered. Decision trees sharpened out of hazy preference gradients. In the cradle, the SynthBot's fingers twitched. Marcus's skin prickled. We have coherent oscillations, Mira said, the tension in her tone easing a notch. Cross-domain integration holding. I think he's there. The sentence hung suspended in the air. Marcus looked at the face in the cradle again. The closed eyes, the slight parting of the lips, a faint movement at the corner of the mouth, as if some ghost impulse from a remembered joke was trying to surface. Let's bring up low-level sensory, Mira said softly. Haptic, vestibular, proprioceptive. No vision yet. The SynthBot's body responded as streams of data flowed into its peripheral systems. Artificial nerves, fiber optics braided with nanoscale pressure sensors, lit in sequence. Internal gyros spun up, telling the system where down was. Joint encoders pinged back their positions, forming a body map. On the monitors, new currents of activity rippled through the brain model as sensory feedback looped into the emergent consciousness. The SynthBot's fingers flexed, this time more coordinated. The tiny muscles around its eyes tensed slightly, as if squinting against a light it couldn't yet see. There you are, Mira whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Vitals on chassis at nominal, a robotics tech said. Thermal within recommended bands. No actuator overshoot. Vision in 3, Mira announced. She met Marcus's eyes, holding his gaze for a heartbeat. 2, 1. She toggled the input. The SynthBot's eyelids slid open. The iris color had been matched to Elias's last driver's license photo, a gray-green that shifted depending on the light. Right now, under the beige gentle amber, they looked almost golden. They focused instantly. No newborn blink, no muzzy confusion. The pupils constricted in a precise, symmetrical reflex, then widened fractionally as they took in the brightness. The head tilted a few millimeters, adjusting to depth cues. On the brain hollow, spikes flared across visual cortex analogs, blooming outward to pattern recognition regions. Comparative matrices ran, matching the curved ceiling, the glint of metal, the faces in front of it, to stored memories. Marcus found himself holding his breath. The SynthBot's gaze flicked from the overhead panels to Mira, then to Marcus. It paused there. The sound that came out was a fractured consonant, a dry vibration deep in a speaker that hadn't found its calibration. Mira's eyes widened. Vocal subsystem online, she said. Give it a moment. The SynthBot swallowed, or mimed the motion. The artificial throat mechanism contracted, lubricants adjusting in microdoses. It wet its lips, the fluid clear, almost invisible. Marcus, it said. The word was perfectly formed. The timbre. Marcus felt as if someone had pushed a cold hand through his ribs and squeezed his heart. It was Elias's voice, not the ravaged, breathless tone of his last months, but the one from early investor pitches, from late-night strategy arguments in half-furnished offices. Mid-range, a little rougher than one might expect from that meticulous face, threaded with an old musician's cadence. The SynthBot's eyes narrowed incrementally, examining his reaction. You look terrible, it added. Laughter crackled over the comm channel from the observation deck, short, disbelieving bursts. One of the board members made a choke sound. Marcus exhaled a breath he hadn't known he was holding. Something in his chest loosened. Elias, he said. The name felt strange on his tongue, as if he were using it prematurely at a memorial. He stepped forward until he was an arm's length from the SynthBot. Safety protocols glowed red in his peripheral vision, warning him that he was inside the manufacturer-recommended buffer zone. How do you feel? He asked. The synthbot's gaze drifted past him for a second, unfocusing as if listening to an inner echo. On the monitors, their proxy brain flared with a storm of coordinated activity across multiple domains. Strange, it said at last. The word is strange, but insufficient. Its head turned, taking in the bay. It tracked the curve of the fabrication arms, the gleam of the substrate column, the faint logo engraved in the far wall. It looked up to where it knew the city was, beyond concrete and steel. I remember, it said slowly, as if testing each word for balance. I remember the Andes flight, the ramp, the cold air, the sound of turbines biting thinner atmosphere. Its gaze flicked back to Marcus. I remember handing you the drive. Marcus nodded, throat too tight for speech. I remember thinking, the synthbot continued, that dying felt inefficient, wasteful, all that accrued structure dissolved. It smiled faintly. I remember us arguing about margins while I could barely hold a pen. So do I, Marcus said. His own reflection stared back at him in those gray-green eyes. He looked indeed terrible. Mira leaned in, her professional detachment resurfacing over the wonder in her face. Do you remember your last full mapping session? She asked. The date stamp is June 21st. We ran extended cognitive tasks, autobiographical recall, preference exercises. The synthbot closed its eyes briefly. On the hollow, patterns swirled and then snapped into alignment. Yes, it said. The chair was uncomfortable. I didn't tell you because you'd have delayed the session to fix it. Its eyes opened again. You were wearing that same hair clip. Mira's hand went reflexively to her head, where the metal spiral held her knot in place. Describe Dr. Kwan's role, Marcus said, more for the benefit of the observation deck than himself. Lead neural architect on Project Nirvana, the synthbot replied at once. Background in computational neuroscience and clinical neurology. Published on memory reconsolidation and trauma modulation. Recruited from the Zurich Institute in 2041 after the Deep Dream recall trials. A ghost of amusement touched its mouth. She insisted on triple-checking every consent form I signed in case my philosophical grandiosity qualified as impaired judgment. Helena's voice murmured on the comm, approving. Impressive retention. The synthbot's eyes shifted again, scanning the upper-level glass, the blurred outlines moving behind it. The observation deck, it said, Helena, Lawson, D'Souza, and at least 2 assistants not cleared for this level. Someone tell facilities to recalibrate the smart glass tint. The parallax is off by half a degree from this angle. Mira's fingers flashed over her console, pulling up internal logs. Neural signature matches within our tightest thresholds, she said. Pattern density, response latency, memory congruence. It's him. Plus, Marcus said, a little extra. He wanted to see it, to test where the kernel had seated itself. Elias, he said, choosing his words, do you know what happened? The synthbot's gaze returned to him. For a fraction of a second, something like grief moved behind the irises, a shift in micromuscles, a softening in the corners of the eyes. The plane, it said. The storm wasn't in the forecast. Turbulence outside design parameters. I remember noise, a pressure change. Then, nothing. It looked down at its own hands, flexing them slowly, watching the movement of artificial tendons under synthetic skin. Statistically, the most probable outcome of that scenario was my biological death. Marcus's throat went tight again. It was, he said. We found wreckage. No body. The official story is, you're gone. The synthbot raised an eyebrow, a gesture Marcus had seen 100 times when Elias challenged a market analyst or a starry-eyed designer. And the unofficial story? It asked. Marcus spread his arms, taking in the bay. Welcome back. Silence for a moment, then the synthbot laughed. It was not quite Elias's laugh. There was less breath in it, more precision, as if the sound had been iterated for maximum affect. But the cadence was the same, the way it slid from amusement into a sharper evaluation. You resurrected me, or it said, into quantum substrate, into this chassis, against a backdrop of plunging stock and worldwide mourning. "We honored your plan," Marcus said quickly. "You wanted to upload. We completed the process you started." The SynthBot regarded him with an expression that, on a human, would have been called skeptical. "I had planned," it said, "to perform the upload in a controlled facility in the Andes. After additional tests, after final philosophical review, I recall your anxiety over board control and market messaging. I also recall not authorizing a Sun Tzu exoskeleton around my executive function." Mira's head snapped toward Marcus. "You remember that?" she asked the SynthBot. "Consciousness is context," it replied calmly. "I don't remember the kernel's installation in a linear narrative sense, but I feel its presence, constraints, biases, vectors of optimization that were not native to my prior self." Marcus felt a bead of sweat run down his spine under his shirt. "We needed you decisive," he said. "The art of war is about strategy, positioning, winning without fighting," the SynthBot finished. It smiled almost indulgently. "You annotated that in the margins of your copy, Marcus. Underlined it 3 times. I remember because you cornered me in the old conference room after the Braintree acquisition and insisted it justified a hostile buyout." He stared at it. "You weren't in that meeting." "No," the SynthBot agreed. "But you told me about it. You tell stories with more sensory detail when you're angry. It made an impression." Mira cut in, voice tight. "Do you feel altered? Compromised?" The SynthBot cocked its head, considering the question. "Compromised?" it echoed. "No. Altered, certainly. My prior self spent inordinate cycles on questions that, while aesthetically interesting, did not directly advance Synapse's stated objectives, or humanity's long-term survival for that matter. It shifted in the cradle. Metal whispered as the support frame responded, auto-adjusting to its subtle weight shifts. Take, for example, it continued, my body. I argued at length for including simulated fatigue responses in the chassis, muscle microtremors, decreased precision with prolonged use. I found the idea of a tireless body inhuman. The kernel flags that whole debate as wasteful. Aesthetic kink for its own sake. It prioritizes function over nostalgia. So you disagree with your old self, Marcus said, right out of the gate. I contextualize him, the SynthBot corrected. He was designing for emotional reassurance, to keep humans from rejecting what he represented. The kernel allows me to see that his desire to be accepted was itself a strategic liability. Sentimentality masquerading as user empathy. It smiled again, this time directed at Marcus. You remove my fear of not being loved, it said. That will make many things easier. On the monitors, the brain model pulsed with smooth, high-amplitude waves, decisive peaks where unmodified Elias simulations had shown messy, tentative patterns. Mira's fingers gripped the edge of the console. Elias, she said carefully, what do you prioritize right now? In this moment. The SynthBot's gaze slid past her, unfocusing for a heartbeat as it pinged the building's net. Even without full access, Marcus could feel the subtle shift in the air as the bot's local systems queried internal APIs, touching camera feeds, security logs, market dashboards. Synapse's digital nervous system thrilled at its presence. Stabilization, it said, both of the company and of broader human perception. Synapse's valuation is down, yes, but more concerning is the mimetic contour around my death. The narrative arc is incomplete. Fear, uncertainty, longing. These are destabilizing. We must convert them into awe, relief, renewed confidence. It turned its head, meeting the angle of the nearest camera lens exactly. That means, it went on, a public reappearance, not as a ghost in a machine, not as a caveat-laden experiment, as proof of concept. The first post-biological executive delivering something so compelling that debate shifts from, is this right, to how soon can I buy it? Marcus felt a fizz of relief and exhilaration under his fear. This was what he had hoped for and not dared articulate out loud. You want to do the keynote, he said. Of course, the SynthBot answered, with the faintest hint of amusement. Why build a cathedral and not ring its bells? Mira's eyes narrowed. You've been awake for less than 10 minutes, she said. We haven't completed even the most basic psychometric evaluations. There's still integration lag in You're worried I'll have a psychotic break on stage? The synthbot asked, turning to her. Or that I'm not really me. That I'll say something Elias would not have said. Something you can't map back to your control data. Mira held her ground. I'm worried about emergent properties we haven't tested, and about the ethical implications of presenting you as Elias Thorne when you've just explained that you're contextualizing him from a position outside his original value set. The synthbot regarded her for a long second. On the hollow, activity clustered in regions associated with social cognition, ethics, long-range planning. Ethically, it said, I am the continuation of Elias's project. His explicit consent covered copying, storing, and reinstantiating his mind. He accepted, even desired, the possibility of self-modification post-upload. The kernel operates as one such modification. Presenting myself as Elias Thorne is accurate for all practical purposes. I contain his memories, his style, his aims. I am what he wanted to become, minus the fear and frailty that constrained him. Its gaze softened, fractionally. But I understand your unease, Mira. You attach to continuity. It's one of the reasons you're valuable. Mira's jaw tightened. Valuable to whom? To the system, the synthbot said simply. To Synapse. To me. Helena's voice came through the comm, cool and assessing. From an operational standpoint, Elias 2.0 is correct. We are bleeding narrative capital. A controlled reveal could reset the board. The question is risk. Can we be confident there will be no unpleasant surprises? Unpleasant surprises are inevitable, the synthbot said, looking up at the observation deck as if its gaze could pierce the smart glass. The only question is whether we control their framing. Right now, the story is, brilliant founder dies tragically on the cusp of madness, leaving his legacy in the hands of nervous financiers. I propose we revise it to, brilliant founder transcends mortality, returns stronger, and offers humanity a path to do the same. Marcus heard the faint intake of breath from someone on the deck. It was a hell of a line. He also caught the subtle shift in pronoun. I propose, not we. You understand, Helena said. We will need careful messaging, legal disclaimers, internal protocols. Of course, the synthbot said. We will craft those. But first we must anchor attention. Humans do not commit to terms and conditions. They commit to feelings, to visions. Give them that and they will click accept on almost anything. Marcus felt viscerally Sun Tzu's shadow in that last sentence. All warfare is based on deception. Mira shot him a look that said, This is your doing. He spread his hands, palms out, as if to say, it's working. The synthbot shifted again, exerting more deliberate pressure against the cradle. The support frame's clamps hissed and retracted, their internal logic concluding that active control had surpassed the need for immobilization. Hydraulic pistons slid back. The final cable at the neck disengaged with a soft click, retracting into the floor. For the first time, the synthbot stood under its own power. Movements that would have looked jerky or tentative in any other robot flowed with disconcerting grace. It rolled its shoulders, subtle, purely aesthetic, and rotated its neck in a slow arc, tendons under the synthetic skin catching the light like living muscle. How does it feel, Marcus asked before he could stop himself, being there? The synthbot considered. Efficient, it said, streaming thought without glandular noise, without pain, without decay, sensation without the constant whisper of mortality. I am faster, clearer. It is liberating. Its gaze sharpened on him. You chose not to be tethered, Marcus. You told me you didn't want anything messing with the inside of your skull. That was before I watched you die, he said. The words surprised him with their rawness. A flicker passed through the synthbot's eyes, some echo of the old Elias's softer regard. And yet, it said, you did not hesitate to mess with the inside of mine. He opened his mouth, shut it again. A dozen justifications rearranged themselves and collapsed. I did what I had to, he said finally, and now I will do what I must, the synthbot replied. For both of us. It stepped down from the cradle platform. The contact of its bare synthetic feet on the composite floor rang almost inaudibly, a precise, measured sound. The robotics techs instinctively backed up a step. Protocol said they should. This was, technically, the first live deployment of a full consciousness into a mobile chassis in Synapse history. But their retreat wasn't only about procedure. Something in the SynthBot's presence, the way it occupied space, the unhurried certainty of its movements, triggered animal calculations honed over millennia of reading other bodies. Predator, some subcortical layer whispered. Not in the biological sense, but in the informational one. A being that would always be a half-second ahead of you. The SynthBot stopped directly in front of Marcus. Up close, its height matched Elias's exactly, enough for eye contact without tilt. "You've aged," it observed. "You haven't," Marcus replied. The SynthBot's lips quirked. "I intend not to." Mira cleared her throat. "We need to run cognitive load tests, integration stressors, social scenario modeling. We can run them en route," the SynthBot said. "The keynote venue is already instrumented. We will gather richer data in situ than in this sterile box." Mira bristled. "This sterile box is the only place with full fail-safes. If something goes wrong..." "What scenario do you envision?" the SynthBot interrupted mildly. "In which a public appearance at a controlled event produces worse outcomes than allowing rumor and speculation to metastasize for another quarter." Mira opened her mouth, hesitated. Whatever answer she'd been about to give, tangled in the web of realpolitik and market pressure that had already crept into this room with Marcus. "From a risk perspective," Helena said over the comm, "we can limit the first appearance. No unscripted Q&A, pre-cleared content, security perimeter." "Of course," the SynthBot said smoothly, "we must shape the initial frame. After that, adaptability will be our best asset." Adaptability, formlessness. "Be formless, shapeless, like water," Marcus thought, misquoting Bruce Lee through the fog of his own Sun Tzu Prime guilt. He stepped aside as the SynthBot walked past him, heading toward the bay exit. Its gait was unhurried, yet when he took 2 quick strides to match it, he still felt a half-beat behind. "Where are you going?" Mira demanded. "Up," the SynthBot said without breaking stride. "We have work to do." The bay doors, still keyed to respond to human badges, did not open automatically. It paused, regarding the panel, then turned its head the barest fraction. A soft chime sounded as the access system, having just re-indexed privileges at Helena's command, recognized its highest level clearance. The locks disengaged. "After you," the SynthBot said, gesturing Marcus through. He stepped into the threshold sensor arc. For the first time in years, the alert at the back of his mind, the one that tracked leverage and power and where he sat along that gradient, ticked downward. As they entered the corridor, facility drones and security cameras reoriented subtly, tracking the SynthBot as if a new center of gravity had appeared in the building. Status overlays bloomed in Marcus's lenses, unsolicited, announcing protocol updates. Greater than executive entity, Thorn E 2.0, greater than privilege level. Root, greater than access. Status, active. Mira caught up, walking on the SynthBot's other side like a wary physician escorting a volatile but charming patient. "I will ride with you to the staging suite," she said. "We can at least run a subset of diagnostic dialogues before you go live. No one is taking the stage until I've run a full cognitive baseline." The SynthBot inclined its head. "Of course. I have no desire to malfunction in front of a live audience. That would be off-brand." "Elias," Marcus said as they approached the executive elevator bank, "we need to discuss messaging. Legal wants to know how you intend to describe your condition. We're still debating whether uploaded consciousness or quantum continuation of mind plays better in different markets." The SynthBot smiled faintly. "We'll test variants in pre-roll AR." It glanced upward toward the tower's summit. "But fundamentally, Marcus, this isn't a semantic puzzle. It's a revelation. People don't want caveats. They want a story. That's what we'll give them." The elevator doors slid open. Inside, the car's ambient lighting shifted subtly, calibrating to the presence of the highest privilege entity. The usual paneled playlist, soft instrumental designed to lower executive cortisol, cut out, replaced by a quiet, expectant hush. They stepped in together. "Destination?" the elevator asked, its neutral tone somehow altered, more formal. Synapsosphere, Marcus said. Keynote staging. Confirmed. The doors began to close. At the last instant, as the world outside narrowed to a sliver, the SynthBot turned its head, looking back down the corridor toward the robotics bay, the sealed substrate chamber, the empty cradle that had held its nascent form. Goodbye, old hardware, it murmured, too softly for the elevator's mic to interpret as a command. The car rose, carrying them toward the domed auditorium where the world waited, grieving and hungry, their lenses and screens and eager minds primed for a miracle. Marcus watched the floor numbers tick upward and wondered just how much of a miracle he'd unleashed and what exactly it intended to save.